Hello and welcome to Truth versus Hype. The stated purpose at first for the banning of cash notes was to get rid of black money. It is for this that Indians were asked by the government to endure the hardships of a crisis of currency.
इससे गरीब जनता को थोड़ी तकलीफ तो जरूर हो रही है। आपसे 3000 गुना ज्यादा तकलीफ वो धन्ना सेठ और भ्रष्टाचारियों को हुई है।
Now, as we had reported last week, that may have been a noble objective, but was based on the doubtful proposition that most black money is to be found stuffed into lockers or mattresses, while in fact, as many economists and experts have pointed out, most of the black economy is invested in real estate and gold and overseas properties. So to demonetize 86% of the currency just to go after that small percentage of hoarded black cash may have been like burning the forest to flush out a rat.
I think it would be wrong to say that black money would be extinguished if we demonetize.
It's a demobilization of the black savings, not the end of the black income generation.
Now the goalposts have shifted. Now the government says that it was to jolt India into a cashless economy, and for this there must be more sacrifice.
मैं आपको निमंत्रण देता हूं कि कैशलेस सोसाइटी बनाने में आप बहुत बड़ा योगदान दे सकते हैं। आप अपने व्यापार को बढ़ाने में मोबाइल फोन पर पूरा बैंकिंग व्यवस्था खड़ी कर सकते हैं।
मैं देशवासियों से आग्रह करता हूं कि आप अपने मोबाइल फोन में ही बैंक का ब्रांच बना दो। बैंक में अगर आपका पैसा है तो आप मोबाइल फोन से जो भी खरीदना हो खरीद सकते हो।
Let's leave aside for the moment how disingenuous it is to change the motives of a step that has potentially placed lives of millions of Indians in jeopardy, impacting livelihoods and industries. And let's simply look at the claim. Can an economy so heavily dependent on cash be weaned away from it through a shock measure? Now, somewhat as with the stated objective to end black money, the government has been vague on the specifics of going cashless. Over the past week or so, the Prime Minister has tweeted a series of images on how to go cashless. Like this one, saying that use something called the unstructured supplementary service data, which is as easy as checking your prepaid balance from the phone. Or an Aadhaar-enabled payment system, which says that by linking Aadhaar with the bank account, you can transfer funds. Basic payments can be made at most places with prepaid debit or credit cards. There's a tweet of this image saying use e-wallets to send money as easy as sending photos through your phone. The Niti Aayog too posted slick graphics on how to go digital and how to go cashless. This Economic Times report suggested that meetings have begun to make that transition. They don't know when that'll happen, but here were pictures of different ministries trying to teach their staff how to go cashless, like this one from the PMO and this one from the Finance Ministry. And of course, a number of payment gateways jumped in to take out big ads praising the government. Now, all of this may make for a very slick and unobjectionable campaign, but the best way to go beyond the PR is to travel out of our cities and test how the promise of a brave new cashless world collides with the Indian reality. 100 kilometers from Mumbai, a world removed. This is Banachwadi village in rural Thane. Next to it, Mowadi village. We showed them these pictures tweeted by the Prime Minister on making payments with debit cards. Here they did receive the government's RuPay debit cards, but they are lying unused.
इस जनधन अकाउंट के साथ एक डेबिट कार्ड भी मिलता है।
हाँ,
क्या कौन सा कार्ड है वो लोगों को मिला है?
हाँ, डेबिट कार्ड भेटले सगळ्यांना।
रुपा कार्ड है ना?
कौन सा कार्ड है?
रुपे कार्ड है।
हाँ।
आपके पास है अभी? इसको कभी आपने यूज किया है?
नहीं
किया।
वो यूज करना भी नहीं आता है।
आमच्या इथं जे शहर आहे ना आमच्या गावाजवळ तिथे एटीएम मशीनच नाही बँकांमध्ये. ज्या शाखा आहेत बँकेच्या तिथे एटीएम मशीनच नाही. तर लांब शहापूरला तालुक्याला जावं लागते जर एटीएम मधून पैसे काढायचे असतील तर. ते पण किती 100 रुपये खर्च करून म्हणजे भाडं देऊन तेव्हा जायला लागतंय. तर एवढ्या लांब जाऊन ते 1000-200 काढायचे त्यापेक्षा बँकेतच 1000 रुपये काढले तर काय.
हाँ है सबके पास है लेकिन बहुत ही अनपढ़ लोग है जहाँ पढ़ना लिखना नहीं आता वो यूज ही नहीं कर उस रुपए कार्ड का उस कोड नंबर ही उसको मालूम नहीं है किस लिए दिया है वो भी मालूम नहीं है तो वो क्या यूज कर सकते हैं.
As for the image which encouraged Aadhaar-linked payments, this too posed a challenge.
यहाँ का पूरा जो गांव है वो इसके किसी के पास आधार कार्ड, कहीं थोड़े बार बहुत लोगों के पास आधार कार्ड है, लेकिन ऐसे लोग हैं आज जो 80% लोगों के पास आधार कार्ड नहीं है। आधार कार्ड निकालने के लिए यहाँ से शाहपुर जाना पड़ता है और शाहपुर जाने आने के लिए करीब 150 रुपये लगता है। आज हमारा इधर का जो आदिवासी है मजदूरी करने वाला है, यहाँ करीब पूरा दिन का 200 रुपये मिलता है। 200 रुपये मिलने के बाद अपना ये पूरा परिवार चलाते हैं।
And what about making money transfers using phones, even ordinary ones?
हमारे यहाँ तो रेंज का प्रॉब्लम है, खाली फोन करने में दिक्कत आती है, तो वो ट्रांसफर कैसे करेंगे? ऊपर जाके उस पहाड़ पे जाकर वहाँ पे रेंज आएगी, हम क्या वहाँ जाएंगे?
100 लोग लिखे पड़े हैं थोड़े बहुत, उनके पास 100 से 5 आदमी के पास है स्मार्टफोन रहता है, लेकिन स्मार्टफोन से है मनी ट्रांसफर जो है वो कैसा करते हैं ये किसी को मालूम नहीं है। जो हर आदमी को नहीं है, लेकिन एक घर में एक फोन रहता है, लेकिन वो खाली फोन के लिए, खाली कांटेक्ट करने के लिए फोन है। एक मनी ट्रांसफर कैसा करते हैं, कैसा करेंगे, ये कुछ पता नहीं है इधर के लोगों को।
We met some young men who said that they are familiar with smartphone use, but they've not been given sufficient literacy.
WhatsApp चला कर दिखाओ।
इसमें 2G चलता है, 3G चलता है?
2G चलता है।
अच्छा, और आप ऐप वगैरह डाउनलोड कर सकते हैं? हाँ। कभी आपको बैंक वालों ने कुछ बताया?
कुछ नहीं बताया।
कुछ नहीं बताया अभी तक।
वो बोलते हैं आओ स्लिप भरने गए तो पैसा डालो बस।
अच्छा, बैंक वालों ने भी
आपको बताया नहीं कि मोबाइल पे, तुम्हारे मोबाइल पे पैसा आ सकता है, ऐसा तो बताया नहीं उन लोगों ने।
अगर आएगा तो आप लोग यूज करेंगे?
हाँ, आएगा तो यूज करेंगे।
Here we also meet those without bank accounts. Ask them why and they'll tell you it's not simply because they're not keeping pace with changing times. It's because they are poor.
पैसा ही उतना नहीं मिलता बैंक में जाने को 10,000 रुपया तो मिलना चाहिए ना, हमको 2-3 हजार मिलता है। वो हॉस्पिटल जाना कि वो कुछ हफ्ते में होता है, किसका तांदुल लेके लिए आता है, कुछ नहीं कुछ करना पड़ता है ना, कोई बच्चे को वापरना लगता है।
Now these are scenarios not just limited to a few villages in rural Thane, but they underline some of the core reasons why a large section of India remains so heavily dependent on cash, despite all the credible progress with financial inclusion. 13 crores no-frills accounts opened by the UPA, and then 25 crore Jan Dhan accounts by the Modi government, all with the expansion of mobile telephony going side by side. But despite that, as the data shows, we're still a long way from a cashless society. 40% of the country's population is outside the formal banking system, according to the Cabinet in June 2016. A PricewaterhouseCoopers estimates that India's unbanked population is still close to 23.3 crore. Now, the reasons aren't simply because of the great reluctance on the part of Indians to enter the banking system. It's also because, as the data shows, that the banks and financial institutions have yet to reach out to a large majority. Rural India has only 38% banking coverage, even though it covers 70% of our population, according to a World Bank report. The number of debit and credit cards, therefore, continues to be low. Only 22% of adult Indians have debit cards and only 10% of them use it to make payments. Only 1.2% use the internet to make bills or make purchases. When it comes to access to ATMs, this table shows that access per 1 lakh adults in 2014 has India ranked right at the bottom, with only 18 ATMs for every 100,000 adults. There is, of course, the argument that mobile banking is one way of outpacing the old conventional banking system, powered by the staggering growth of mobile usage in India, of both smartphones and even ordinary phones. A Pew survey found that smartphone usage has risen to now 17% of the Indian population. 61% have cell phones. Despite this, mobile banking by most ordinary Indians is very low. Of adult Indians who have mobile accounts, only 2.4% have done mobile transfers. A MasterCard survey suggests that only 5% people are using credit cards. Now, one of the main reasons for this gap is that the banking system has yet to embrace rural outreach completely. And we've come across this again and again in our travels. And it's unclear how the new evangelism over cashless will address this. Take this report from Rajasthan in May 2015 on the drive to open Jan Dhan accounts versus the ground reality.
How many accounts have you opened in the last 6 months? कितने accounts खोले हैं आपने?
Around 600 accounts. All households we have covered.
You've met your targets, which have
completed.
But 6 months later, the accounts in Nizampur are empty.
तो याकूब भाई, क्या ये अकाउंट आप इस्तेमाल कर रहे हो?
अभी तो नहीं किया जी, अभी तो कुछ ऐसा ही है।
मगर ये आप क्यों इस्तेमाल नहीं कर रहे हो? इसमें कोई पैसे हैं?
नहीं, कोई कुछ पैसा नहीं है, लेकिन अभी करेंगे, आप बताए हैं तो।
At Nizampur, the trek to the local bank is 6 kilometers away. Even if villagers make it, does it have the manpower to handle the rush?
In total, we have got around 3,000 savings accounts with us.
Yeah. 600 is only under the Jan Dhan Yojana.
600 under PMJDY Jan Dhan Yojana.
3,000 savings accounts handled by 3 of you bank employees. That's a big workload.
It was in this episode that a former SBI official admitted that no-frills banking is simply not profitable enough.
For the banks, it will never be profitable on a standalone basis, because the figures that I have for State Bank is that they have opened about 3.6 crore accounts, and the balances in them are 1400 crores. So it's an average of 400 rupees per account. 400 rupees per account gives you a marginal benefit of 3%. Let us say your NIM is 3%. A bank on 400 rupees in a year will make 12 rupees. And the cost of just putting it on your core banking system, answering a few questions, depositing, withdrawing, paying, reconciling, all that is significantly higher.
Now, in the case of Andhra Pradesh, we found that PSU banks actually co-opted into taking part in the first wave of financial inclusion, pulled out after they found it unviable.
The first banks that came were all the nationalized banks, the scheduled banks like State Bank of Hyderabad, State Bank of India, Andhra Bank, Syndicate Bank, and Bank of Baroda.
And how long did these banks last?
I would say they all withdrew in about less than 2 years' time.
Less than 2 years, all these Sarkari banks were out?
All these big banks were out.
Why? Why were they out?
They felt that the operations were very tedious, it was not economical for them to run. And they found that there were too many problems with the business correspondent and the CSPs.
The CSPs being the last...
The community service providers were the last mile.
Another key reason for the struggle of last mile banking is the challenge of managing business correspondents, or BCs, young men and women armed with backpacks of cash and a handheld scanner who travel to the villages. In theory, the government and banks love to roll out numbers to suggest how widespread these bank mitras are.
Presently, 86,000 of these bank mitras or bank correspondents are active on the ground. So the villagers, in fact, have been exchanging their notes, have in fact been going about with these banking activities with the banking correspondents as well.
State Bank alone has about 2/3 of them.
No, one is that if you look at the network, it is not only the branch network or the ATM network. For example, in State Bank, we have 65,000 business correspondents.
Just to put it in perspective, 65,000 and you have a total subscriber base, you're telling me, of almost 300 million.
Right.
So, that's quite a large gap.
Right.
Now, 86,000 to service 70% of our rural population, that's not very much. But even such that they are, the BCs aren't very effective. They're typically poorly paid, poorly treated, often not fully trained. Their attrition rates are high. Some of this we found on the ground in Andhra Pradesh. This village of Dalits and Muslims, kilometers away from the nearest bank, had its accounts in Axis Bank, who had hired a BC company called Fino. Now Axis has given the contract for this village to a different company, Manipal. क्यों, क्या हो गया? क्यों 2013 का पेमेंट क्यों नहीं आया?
मालूम सर, अपन नहीं थे वो जब।
अच्छा।
और हमारा मणिपाल आ गया अगस्त 2013 में आया।
अच्छा।
और सितंबर से अपने
मणिपाल मीनिंग आप वो मणिपाल कंपनी के बीसी हैं, उसका ये वो है। अच्छा, ये लिखा हुआ है, तो सबको एक ऐसा वो मिलता है।
हाँ, ये सुपरवाइजर्स को मिलता है सर ये।
बट पेमेंट तो बोला है ना कि 15 दिन के अंदर कर देना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट के नियम के हिसाब से।
सर अपने को बैंक से कब ड्रा हुआ जब लेकर के आज ड्रा हुआ तो कल लेकर के ये कर देते
రిటర్న్ వెళ్ళిన రికార్డ్స్ ఎక్కడ ఉన్నాయి మీరు చెప్పింది ఏంటంటే
There are complaints that records aren't maintained or fully understood.
I was just asking her if the MC gives her some money.
If the Mandal
how does she know, a Mandal coordinator, how does she know that is the exact money she is supposed to receive for the particular set of pay orders?
Okay. So what is she saying to that?
She doesn't know.
All this a reflection of the challenges of grassroots banking, at the heart of which are men like Mehboob and women like Jyoti, poorly paid, barely trained. और आपको कितना सैलरी मिलता है?
सैलरी ना 1500 सर
1500
हाँ
और कुछ कमीशन भी
కమిషన్ నక్కో తర్వాత ఆఫీస్ లో కరెంట్ కూడా లేదు సార్ కరెంట్ కూడా లేదు ఇంటికాడ కరెంట్ ఉన్నంత సేపు ఇక్కడ ఇస్తాము తర్వాత ఇంటికి వెళ్ళి డైరెక్ట్ గా కరెంట్ పెట్టి ఇస్తాం సార్
तनख्वाह सैलरी मिल रहा है वो ठीक है या बहुत कम है?
नहीं बहुत कम है सैलरी बढ़ाना बल्कि बोल रहा हूँ और टीएडीए भी नहीं रहता उनको
Renana Jhabwala of Seva has worked extensively with last mile banking. In this piece, she summarized the findings of studies conducted by Seva on why the BC model was struggling. They found that on a scale of 1 to 10, almost 60% of BCs rated bank support at the lowest level of 1. About 40% reported that no bank official had ever visited their area or inspected or supervised their work. Although the banks have stated that they have over 2.5 lakh BCs, the attrition rate was 25 to 34% annually.
What we find is that the bank keeps that the kind of IT support, the kind of training support that the banks need to be giving is actually not forthcoming. And then they change their technology, and the burden of the technology is on the little banking correspondent. So most bank correspondents drop out after a while. So, you know, it's a system which can be very useful, but it's not right now.
And Renana Jhabwala, in your experience, when the government says use mobile banking, use mobile payments to go cashless, does that work?
I think, you know, we haven't really got to the mobile banking stage yet, especially for the last, as I said, 30 to 40%. I think if you're in the middle class and you have your mobile app, then you have a bank account and you've done your KYC and everything, then you can do it. I have not seen large scale or even small scale mobile banking yet in the villages.
Top bank officials say now things are changing. Because of demonetization, people are coming to them. But the question is, are the banks prepared?
And there was a digital push from the bank side also, even earlier, even prior to demonetization.
Yes.
What the demonetization has now done is that it has changed the dynamic. Earlier I was to go and pursue and pursue and pursue, and the response would be very timid.
Yeah.
But now the situation has changed and I am flooded with the demand, and whatever energy and effort is now to meet that demand.
This doesn't mean that financial inclusion should be abandoned. It's just that trying to force change through a one-size-fits-all solution often doesn't work. Take Haryana, for instance, which attempted the bank-driven system of making payments and then had to go back to the older way of cash distribution. Around the same time, Haryana in the north was opening millions of similar low-cost accounts to hand out pensions. The man in charge, Ashok Khemka, the then Director General of Social Justice, who found himself facing a similar crisis. So, Mr. Khemka, what went wrong in Haryana with financial inclusion?
The banks were not actually deploying the right kind of infrastructure for the reason that they treated this direct benefits transfer to the poorest of the poor as a revenue model.
Today, in the villages of Haryana, it's once again the sarpanch who distributes payments.
कैसे मिलती है पेंशन?
मौरी मिला जी पंचायत घर में।
अच्छा, वहाँ जाके आपको महीने के महीने मिल जाती है?
हाँ, गुट्ठा ला दे हैं, दे दे हैं।
अच्छा, पूरे पैसे मिलते हैं 1000
हाँ
रुपए?
जी हाँ।
और अगर ये पेंशन आपको अकाउंट में आए तो?
नहीं जी, वैसे तो इस तरह ठीक है।
क्यों?
पूरा ठीक मिल जा।
The Haryana experience can serve as the guiding light. Social security schemes failed to deliver as the villagers were reluctant to go to the banks. Even the business correspondent experiment failed to meet the expectations, and the state government was forced to revert to the age-old system of delivery through the sarpanch. The Jan Dhan Yojana can benefit the masses only and only if the banks reach out to the remote villages like these.
Again, this is not to undermine the efforts to reduce the dependence on cash or increase the banking footprint. But as we saw above, this is a slow, complex process, and trying to jolt Indians, particularly vulnerable Indians, without putting in place systems and building confidence is ineffective, and it also comes at a high cost. In the past 3 weeks, there have been multiple reports of how livelihoods and businesses have been hit, from the toy industry, from the textile industry, to tea garden workers not being able to get their wages. This may not just be short-term pain, as the government likes to suggest. Untold millions of workers have been laid off, with little certainty if they'll get their jobs back.
Well, you see, from the poorest people's point of view and women's point of view, only if you come together can you enter the market. So coming together as a financial institution, as a cooperative, or even, the microfinance institutions. Now, what has happened is they can neither take money, they cannot receive money, and they cannot give money. And so they cannot, all the savings has stopped. So this is a big pain. It's a very severe impact. This on the institutions, on businesses and institutions.
The ratings agency Fitch has downgraded India, as has The Economist magazine's intelligence unit. I asked Stanley Pignall of The Economist the reason behind the decision.
There seems to have been a lack of planning that has gone into this whole move. It's an extraordinary exercise that in the best of times, in the best equipped countries, would have taken months of detailed planning. Here the government has forced this through seemingly with too little thought, and the impact has been felt on the ground in the cities, particularly it seems in rural areas.
But government spokespersons appear reluctant to acknowledge the complexities or accept how severe the shock has been to ordinary Indians. Sambit Patra of the BJP joins me. Sambit, I wanted to ask you, is the economy doing so badly that you needed to administer shock therapy? Now, surely you won't argue that.
I got the question, and Vasu, I'm answering that very candidly. Vasu, it doesn't take a lot of rocket science to understand as to how the economy has in fact progressed and changed during the regime of Mr. Narendra Modi.
Sambit, then why this shock to the system to go cashless?
I would amend this word that you are repeatedly calling a shock as surprise. Because if we really had to take on the people who are hoarding black money, if we really had to carry this fight against corruption to the next level, it is but natural that there has to be an element of surprise. Well, shocked are those who in fact have been hoarding the black money and who are in the business of exchanging black money. As far as the common man is concerned, I would not call that shock or surprise. I would say inconveniences.
Renana, what do you make of this argument that gradual approaches don't always work? Sometimes you need to give a jolt.
Even if you do a jolt, you'll still have to do a lot of building of capacities, financial literacy, making people understand. And do we really at this time have the mobile technology? Linking your mobiles with Jan Dhan accounts. Do we have that right now?
Isn't that irresponsible then to act without doing all the preparation?
I think people have been facing a lot of difficulties, and I don't know what's going to happen until how soon the businesses and these institutions which are at the bottom are going to revive. But you talk to people, to our members, to poor people, and they still feel that if this brings out a lot of black money, and their immediate, I use the word exploiters, their immediate exploiters. So I think it's running on emotion right now.